Walk anywhere in Britain and you're literally stepping on history. Lost towns, forgotten people, vanished cultures, all lie beneath our feet. This is amazing.
You just stepped back 4,600 years in time.
But little by little, they're coming to the surface.
Finding these things is incredible.
Giving us a glimpse of how our ancestors once lived.
Someone could be well at dinner time and then dead by bedtime.
And helping us separate the myths and legends from historical fact.
I'm Alex Langlands. Good, spot of luck. Glad I came along.
And I'm Helen Skelton. In this series, we'll be diving into the past, coming face to face with some of the extraordinary people and places in our history.
It is a fantastic landscape.
And along the way, we'll be uncovering the secrets that have remained hidden underground for centuries.
Get digging. I want to know what's in there.
War, famine, disease, and death. Britain made lots of advances in the Middle Ages, but it definitely had an image problem.
And it was an image that was well-deserved. The medieval period was bloody and brutal, and according to many historians, life was at its absolute worst in the 14th century.
But just how bad did things get? Our next dig should give us some answers.
We're in Poulton, Cheshire, on the banks of the River Dee. It's the site of a burial ground stretching back 1,000 years and containing the perfectly preserved skeletons of hundreds of people. As archaeologists uncover the remains, they're finding that each has a story to tell about one of the most disastrous periods in our country's history.
In a century where violence was prevalent and sickness was rife, most peasants could expect only to live until their early 30s.
Incredibly, some did manage to survive and even thrive. And in this programme, I'm going on a nationwide tour to find out just how they did it.
I'm going to be staying at the dig to find out more about the secrets emerging from beneath.
Poulton lies on the border between England and Wales. It was first inhabited around 10,000 years ago, and there was a significant settlement during Roman times. Today, it's a hive of activity, attracting professional archaeologists and enthusiastic amateurs. They travel from all over the country to this one spot.
Like most of the area around here, this was an ordinary farmer's field, until an extraordinary discovery. Now, I'm guessing you must be Kevin.
Hello, Helen. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Thanks for having us. So, talk to me about this site. What have you found here?
We found one of the most important medieval sites in Britain. We have the foundations, the very base stones of an old chapel. It was very much like a lot of medieval churches we see today, with a tower, a nave and a chancel. But we found really good survival of the human remains. We didn't expect the human remains, the skeletons, to survive as well as they did. But we will have almost perfect preservation of the skeletons, and we've dug 959 so far. That's the largest rural assemblage of medieval skeletons ever excavated in Britain.
It's no wonder this is considered one of the most important archaeological sites in the country. Generations of families all buried in one spot. 959 bodies unearthed so far. But how many are there in total?
We estimate up to 2,000. We've dug in the graveyard itself, in the western, southern and northern graveyards, but we've never dug in the eastern. And there's a good possibility that there's just as many in the eastern graveyard as the three combined.
In the Middle Ages, around 80% of Britons were peasant farmers. So by excavating and studying the bones of those here in Poulton, we can learn more about how our ancestors worked, played, lived and died.
Oh my days. I mean, I knew there were skeletons here, but that is something else, isn't it?
Beautiful preservation, isn't it? Really beautiful.
So intact.
Absolutely.
I mean, who was this?
Well, we've got a sub-adult here exposed, so somebody who's about 12 years old when they died.
From a skeleton, how much can we learn about this young person's life? What they did, what kind of things they ate, what quality of life they had?
Well, in this particular skeleton, I think the most interesting thing we can say about that aspect is the fact that there are lines. Can you see the teeth here? Can you see the lines on the teeth?
Yeah.
Very, very faint lines. And as the teeth develop, something can stop them growing as they should do. And they cause these linear grooves. It's basically lines of arrested growth. And the culprit of that, it can start from any stresses in the environment. The interesting thing about this individual, it hasn't got just one line across the teeth. It's got multiple lines. So it's happened again and again and again. So starting from about 1 year of age, we can see that this individual, this child, suffered some kind of stress from the environment. And it carried on. The stress was chronic. So it was throughout the child's life up until about the age of 9 or 10.
And what would that stress have been?
It could be an infection, it could be a lack of nutrients, it could be the lack of one particular mineral or a lack of calories in the diet, a tapeworm maybe, any of these, or any psychological stress as well. I mean, it tells you a lot about the history of this area, the history of these people.
Life for peasants in the Middle Ages could be all too short. And the chances of them making it through childhood were no more than 50-50. But evidence of this kind of hardship in Poulton remained hidden for centuries. Throughout Britain, it's a similar story. Thousands of ancient villages have disappeared into the ground, and it's only when conditions are just right that we get clues to their existence.
Long hot summers are great for holidaymakers, but they're brilliant for archaeologists. When the ground dries out, faint traces emerge, and a low sun in the sky casts shadows over lost archaeological sites. But all of this is best seen from above. Archaeologist Dominic Powsland has been flying over Britain for more than 40 years in search of sites that can't be spotted from the ground. So if there's anyone who can track down a lost medieval village, he's our man. Dominic, it looks like fantastic conditions for this kind of work, isn't it?
It is. Particularly for the earthworks, taking an early morning or a late in the evening flight when you've got long shadows means that from certain angles you're likely to see much more than you would if you went to the middle of the day.
So it's going to bring everything out in really quite sharp relief.
Yeah, we should get plenty of relief because you've got nice shadows forming from the low sun.
Today, Dominic's looking for the outline of Warren Percy, a North Yorkshire village believed to have been abandoned around 500 years ago. And what is it about Warren Percy then? What's the value of being up here flying over?
It's immeasurable. You can actually see the structure of it as a village, which you don't necessarily see from the ground. Suddenly it's like turning on a light switch and there's the past. And there's Warren there. I might want to open the window and then lean over.
Is the window open?
Yeah, window open.
Blimey. Ah, wow, there it is. Fantastic. This is exactly what we were hoping to see. The remains of a lost village that around 200 people once called home. Oh, goodness me, you can see whole platforms. It's absolutely remarkable. A whole deserted village there.
So you can actually see the roads through the village, you can see the individual buildings.
And it's quite something. It's quite fascinating. I mean, I could make out sort of house platforms, houses, garden plots, pathways, all there preserved in a series of earthworks.
Yep, absolutely. And we have the great privilege of being in a plane where we can actually see it properly.
Yeah. There's few traces of it now, but Warren Percy would have been a similar size to Poulton back in the 14th century. There are up to 3,000 more abandoned villages in Britain, and experts like Dominic are trying to record them all.
If we look at the map, we can see there are very dense clusters of deserted medieval villages.
Yeah.
And they're all over the country. Yeah, this one in Lincolnshire is a really fine example.
It couldn't be clearer, could it?
You can basically read the individual houses.
So, Dominic, what do we think happened to some of these places that caused them to be abandoned?
With most of these, we don't really know what are the triggers that cause those places to become deserted over time.
Right.
So if you have a depopulation, whether it occurs because of famine or disease, the influence of climate, economy, property ownership, a whole load of different variables contribute to a point where increasingly people die out and they're no longer sustainable.
Next, what were the greatest threats to life in the 14th century? How science is shining new light on hardship and hunger.
There are stories of cannibalism, stories of people abandoning their children because they just couldn't feed them.
And the mystery of the Poulton burial rituals. Does this ancient church hold the answer?
Welcome to your doom.
What is this? One village, one burial ground, and the remains of up to 2,000 people. Poulton in Cheshire is one of Britain's most remarkable archaeological sites because of the sheer number of bodies that have been unearthed here. These skeletons are providing new evidence of how people lived and died in the Middle Ages. What's happening here?
Amber is taking an easting and a northing reading. So she's finding the location within our grid system of the ankles. And she'll do another one for the pelvis and then another one for the head.
So you know exactly where
We
it
know,
is?
and the orientation it was lying in.
Okay.
And we take a level of the skeleton above sea level too. So a distance above sea level. So we can find out its location in space and its depth as well in the ground.
Wow. As soon as you hear it, it's very easy to see what a meticulous, difficult, careful process this is.
It takes some patience, yeah.
Although this area has been farmed for thousands of years, the hard soil has made it difficult to plough. One reason why the bones have been so well preserved.
This sort of crushing of the skull here, that's just
Post-mortem,
Right.
yeah, to death. So that's the impact, basically, of the earth above it. You can see that there are compression fractures in
Right.
the ribs here.
Right.
Yeah, the lower legs as well.
But that's happened after?
That's happened after death.
Is it possible to tell at this stage what this individual might have died of?
It's not, no. There's no indication on the bone of trauma or signs of infection. A lot of the diseases that were around at that time would have killed the host quite quickly and not enough time for the bones to make any changes or adapt to the disease. There might be other signs of nutritional deficiency or mineral deficiency that they can look for. The underside of the orbits is a good place to look for signs of anemia, something like that.
During the Middle Ages, poor nutrition could be a huge problem in places like Poulton. Despite their poverty, it was possible for peasants to live a relatively healthy life when things were going well. But it was all too easy for crop failures to make getting enough to eat a daily struggle.
To keep famine at bay, every growing season became a challenge to produce as much food as possible. And this place is a fantastic illustration of what that meant in practice. This is Winterbourne medieval barn, and when it was built in 1342, it was a massive 143 feet long. Just imagine how much back-breaking labour went into filling this place with grain to the rafters. As many as 80 full-sized oak trees were used to construct the barn's towering roof.
When we talk about impressive medieval architecture, we're usually referring to the great cathedrals of the age. But this, for me, is just as significant. It's a memorial to the daily life of a peasant community.
But I'm not here simply to admire its design and construction. The original timbers in this barn hold secrets to our past. And by studying samples from them, we can start to understand why putting food on the table was so difficult for our ancestors.
And solidly medieval, yes?
14th century, I believe.
First things first, we need to get drilling.
So we're going for this area just down here.
Right, OK.
So we're going to hopefully take a core sample straight through that. And
Through there, and then you get a profile, basically, through the age of this tree.
Absolutely, yes. So we can see how it's been growing and what's been affecting it, hopefully.
Right, OK, right. Well, I'd better let you get on with that and get out your way.
Perfect.
Good steady hand, I suspect you need this.
You do, yes, absolutely. You start off very slow.
Yeah, picking up the speed now.
Yeah.
You're happy it's bitten?
Yeah.
I really like the idea that we're drilling back through time here.
Just to get through the surface, and then as we go through it, and get it hopefully in one piece.
It's fantastic.
There we go, our core sample. So we try and take it out gently now.
That last bit.
There we go. And so we have that core. And so what we can see there is how well the tree has been growing year on year.
In the years leading up to the barn's construction, Britain was struck by a devastating famine. For centuries, we've only had written accounts from the time to help us understand what happened. Now tree samples like this are providing vital new evidence. At Swansea University, scientists have developed a new technique to unlock their secrets. As every schoolboy knows, if you count the rings here, each ring equals a particular year, but you're going beyond that, aren't you?
Yeah, we're really interested in finding out exactly what the climate was like in the year when each ring was formed. What it comes down to is the rainfall.
Yeah.
Summer dryness and wetness, that's what we're trying to measure. The great thing about the wood is we know exactly which year it formed.
The team measure heavy oxygen isotopes in the cell walls of tree rings. This determines the amount of rainfall that fell in the summer when the rings were formed. The process reveals just how tough things could be in the so-called century of crisis.
This is a wooden graph, effectively, and high values mean dry summers.
Right, OK.
And low values mean wet summers.
Right.
Right at the start of the 14th century, we have the first indication of 2 wet summers together.
OK, so back-to-back wet summers.
Yeah, and this is known as a time when there was a real shortage. And then the real crisis starts to kick in here, actually.
Right.
And it's 1315.
OK.
And it was incredibly wet all year and everywhere in Europe. The whole of Europe.
Yeah.
Terrible harvest.
Yeah.
And then the next year, I don't think the harvest was much better. And then the next year, it's worse again.
1 year's bad enough, but 2 years, 3 years, ever-diminishing grain supplies.
If you look at the whole record,
Yeah.
it's unprecedented.
800 years of British history. There's nothing like it, is there?
No. And there are stories of cannibalism, stories of people abandoning their children because they just couldn't feed them.
This is a remarkable and unexpected insight into one of Britain's lost tragedies. And if we compare what Danny was saying to what's written in the historical source materials, then it all starts to make sense. We have this account from 1316, which says, "The hand of God appears to be raised against us. For in the past year there was such plentiful rain that men could scarcely harvest the corn or bring it safely to the barn. In the present year, worse has happened, for the floods of rain have rotted almost all the seed."
As the dig at Poulton continues, the team are uncovering more clues to the medieval way of life. And a big part of people's lives was how they dealt with death.
Kevin, talk us through what you found here.
Well, at the moment, we have a burial of a child of around 3 to 4 years. The students have fully excavated and recorded the actual grave fill, and they've exposed the burial beneath. They've recorded the burial, and now they're beginning to lift the bones.
Hundreds, possibly thousands of people were buried here in this very concentrated area. How can you work out when they're from?
That's a very good question, and we use several different pieces of evidence. The first thing is religious belief. If you look at this burial here, even though it's partially lifted, you can see that the head is at the west end and the feet is at the east end. This is a classic medieval Christian layout, so that on the day of judgment, you rise to face the east, to face Jesus coming back at the call of Gabriel's trumpet. Now, that shows that it's medieval.
And would these people have been buried in coffins?
Some of them were. We have a belief that about 20% were, and about 80% were buried in shrouds, so basically in cloths.
Christian burial rituals were obviously important to peasants in the Middle Ages. Not really surprising when religion played such a major part in their lives. But in an age when most people were illiterate, how were such beliefs passed on? And how did ordinary people learn about heaven and hell? Poulton's medieval chapel has long gone, but others still survive. The Guild Chapel is one of the most historic buildings in Shakespeare's hometown of Stratford-upon-Avon. Step inside and you get a dramatic introduction to the way ordinary people saw the afterlife centuries ago.
Hello, you must be Kate.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Welcome to your doom. What is this?
This is a Last Judgment painting. What you're seeing here is the moment when the souls of the dead rise from their graves on Last Judgment Day. And this is a really common image, one that would have been found in churches and chapels across medieval England, just like Poulton perhaps.
The so-called doom painting is faded now. In the Middle Ages, it would have been brightly coloured and scarily detailed.
Ah, well, so is this a version of this?
Yes, this is what the paintings would have looked like in 1496 when they were first painted. So here we have Christ, he's sitting on a rainbow in judgment.
Now, it looks like everybody rises up from the grave. Is that what the belief was?
Yes, when the Last Judgment trumpets sound and the dead rise from their graves at Poulton and in every other village in the country, and then they will be judged. So some of them will be heading up to the heavenly Jerusalem and others will be heading down to hell.
Now, hell looks like it's going to be quite a busy place. A lot of people are heading here.
Yes, if we look in a little bit more detail, here we have the gruesome mouth of hell, and here are the souls of the damned being dragged with a chain around them by demons down through hell into unspeakable torments beyond. And here are demons with flails tormenting those who are being boiled alive.
These paintings did serve a real purpose, didn't they? Why were they done?
Well, they were done to remind you how to behave, what to do, what not to do. What better way on a Sunday of reminding people of your sermon by just turning around and pointing to the images on the wall.
The villagers of Poulton probably had similar paintings in their chapel. But when England split from the Roman Catholic Church during the Reformation, many such images were defaced or destroyed. Others, like the Guild Chapel Doom, vanished beneath a thick layer of limewash.
Interestingly, the person who was responsible for that was John Shakespeare in 1563-64.
Hang on, Shakespeare, as in William Shakespeare?
Yes, Shakespeare's dad.
So how likely is it that William Shakespeare would have seen these paintings?
Well, Shakespeare's only born at that time, so it's not very likely he would have seen The Last Judgment. It was too controversial. But there is another painting that he might have seen.
Show me. So is there a chance that William Shakespeare would have seen this?
Yes, there is a chance, and he might actually have walked through that door, which connects us from the Guild Chapel to the Guildhall next door, which was Shakespeare's school.
So that's where he went to school on the other side, and he could have come in here to worship?
Yes, perhaps he borrowed the key from his father and snuck into the chapel to see gruesome images like this, that perhaps later on influenced his writing.
I love the idea of him sneaking in here. What's happening here? Who are these characters?
Well, this takes us back to Poulton, perhaps, and our bodies in the grave. Here we've got a shrouded corpse. We've got skulls and bones in the grave. He's in his woolen shroud. And these individuals are reminding us in the text between them that you should live a good life because you're going to end up as the shrouded corpse in the grave.
So are these worms?
These are worms, yes, devouring the corpse in the grave. A pretty grisly image, but one that was very familiar to our medieval peasants in the 14th and 15th centuries. And then at the bottom, we have a Latin inscription, and this time it's the corpse speaking to us. It says, "Look on me and weep. As I am now, so shall you be."
Coming up, the farmer's discovery that first brought archaeologists flocking to Poulton.
He came up here with a spade, dug a hole one day and found that.
And more secrets of the skeletons. Were these villagers victims of war?
This is a case we call Arrowhead Man because lying on the ribs was this arrowhead.
Cheshire, prime agricultural country, worked since Neolithic times. On its extreme western edge, Chapel House Farm, where besides crops and dairy herds, you'll find an archaeological team excavating a village that was hidden underground for centuries. But what first brought them here? Richard Fair inherited the farm from his father, Jerry, the former mayor of Chester.
Richard, this is your land. Tell me a little bit about this site.
We took this farm over in about the early 1960s, and my father saw that there was the site of a chapel marked on the Ordnance Survey maps. So being inquisitive, he came up here with a spade, dug a hole one day and found that.
And what is it?
That's a 15th century, I think, floor tile, which would have been used to floor the church and any other buildings that were about.
Why was your dad so keen to get people here and get them unearthing and excavating?
He wanted to find the history of the place. Having found this and heard other stories about what might be here, Father got someone from Chester City Council Archaeology and Liverpool University to come and have a look at it. It was a cold, wet, miserable February day, and they had to walk up from the lane over there, and they were looking pretty hacked off and fed up with it until they got onto the ploughed ground and they saw what was there, and I could just see the change in their faces, and that's where we started.
Following that initial discovery, archaeologists located the village cemetery, providing us with a unique insight into life in the Middle Ages. So far, they've dug up nearly 1,000 skeletons.
Ah, Ria, where are you? Hiya, Chuck.
And today, they've discovered another one.
Yeah, take a look at this. Cranium. So, fragments of skull.
OK, that's looking good, isn't it?
It does look good. What do you reckon? It's quite thin, isn't it? Juvenile?
So juvenile.
So the cranium's obviously compacted, but it looks like it's all going to be there.
All the human remains unearthed at the site are carefully excavated, then sent for analysis here at Liverpool John Moores University.
So how much can you tell, or how much can you learn from skeletons that are 700 years old?
Well, among other things, you can measure them to determine the stature of an individual. You can determine sex in some cases. You can determine if they are, for example, in this case, showing a really nasty example of osteoarthritis. So you can determine that this person was really working hard.
Can I ask you about these teeth?
Sure.
Because these are phenomenal.
Well, they're nice, but they're worn. You've got dental wear because they're introducing stone grit into their wheat and their rye and their barley when they're grinding it, so that has a tendency to wear the teeth out. You can see all of this calcified plaque in here, and that tells you that they're eating a very soft diet. They're eating a highly processed diet.
So that's not only giving us an insight into their diet, but also how they were making food.
Yes, absolutely.
The picture that emerges from some of these skeletons is a harsh one. By analysing the state of the bones, the team can draw at least one conclusion about the lives of Poulton peasants. When all farm labour was manual, their work was back-breaking and dangerous.
So tell me about some of these bones.
Well, the humerus, the left upper arm bone here, has a fracture, and the clavicle, the collarbone, is also fractured. There's a bit of a fracture also on that rib.
Is it fair to conclude from the spine and from the injuries to the upper body that this person did a lot of manual labour?
They were probably doing manual labor for this type of condition to develop. There's a lot of bony growths in the lumbar region, which is indicative of arthritis type of things. Some of the fractures are also indicating people that are doing manual labor, people that are living that kind of lifestyle have a higher incidence of accidents.
Okay.
And these accidents could have caused these fractures as well. People fall off things, they get kicked by a horse. Different accidents can happen.
But not all injuries were due to hard work or accidents. In the Middle Ages, wars were frequent, at home as well as abroad. And because of its location, the people of Poulton may have seen more fighting than you would expect.
Hello, Spencer.
Especially in the 13th and 14th centuries.
Remarkable ruin we've got here. Talk me through where we are at the moment.
We are right on the border, so we are looking, if we look east, we are looking towards Cheshire and Poulton.
OK, so very definitely English on that side.
We look this way, we're right into Wales.
Right, OK, so this is the real borderlands, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And what do we know specifically then about this castle and its origins?
So this castle, it's on the border between England and Wales, and it's the castle of Dafydd ap Gruffudd. He is a Welsh prince, and King Edward I places him here on the border to control this part of the world in the 1270s. He eventually decides he's more Welsh than English, and in 1281, he attacks an English castle here on the border, at which point the Second Welsh War really gets underway.
So that's like a sort of trigger point.
Absolutely.
Here on Poulton's backyard, basically.
Absolutely.
So the atmosphere here, is it fair to say, in the medieval period would have been quite tense?
There's lots of arguments and bloodshed in all the towns through here.
Right.
So you'll find English people raiding to steal cattle. You'll find the Welsh will go and raid and steal them back. Everybody's doing it.
Right.
It's a normal part of society.
So it's pretty rough, wasn't it, the old 14th century?
A very, very rough century in which to live.
I quite like the 21st century.
Just 5 miles from the dig site, this would have been the closest military base to the village of Poulton. Peaceful today, but in a state of war 700 years ago.
The Poulton peasants then are right in the middle of all of this, aren't they?
Absolutely. So if we look at the map, we can see that they are right on the border. So they are here, and the border is a couple of 100 metres to the south.
Right.
They're always going to have somebody passing through, be it Welsh or English.
They're really in the thick of it here.
Absolutely.
Evidence of those conflicts has been unearthed at the dig. One of the bodies analysed by the lab team displays clear signs of fatal wounds.
I appreciate that you can learn a lot about a person in terms of disease and how they might have lived, but can you actually tell how they died?
Sometimes. It's rare, but you can on occasion. This is a case where we can. This is a case we call Arrowhead Man, because he was found with this arm, his right arm, wrapped over like this in an unusual burial position.
Like this?
Like that. And then when the arm was lifted, lying on the ribs underneath it, right there, was this arrowhead.
Oh, so that's an arrowhead. That's huge.
Yes.
I mean, that would definitely kill you, wouldn't it?
That would definitely kill you. They were people killers, used in battle to kill people.
But Poulton isn't, or doesn't seem like a site of battle.
No, but on the other hand, right at the bottom of the hill by the Poulton graveyard is the Welsh border.
So you're saying he was killed by a Welshman?
Could have been a border skirmish, and he got caught up in it. It's not just the everyday life at Poulton, but there were rare cases of more dramatic, violent death also. It's a lucky find from us from an archaeological point of view, but it obviously wasn't lucky for this individual because that's how they died.
The bow and arrow was a common weapon in the Welsh border wars, but just as popular was the javelin.
How are you? Nice to meet you.
Spencer's introducing me to Roland Williamson, an expert in medieval fighting techniques.
OK, javelin spear, what's the difference?
A javelin is merely a spear that you've let go of.
Right, OK.
You wouldn't necessarily expect to get this back. Well, assuming you'd managed to kill the object that you were hurling this at, then, you'd recover it.
Well, of course, assuming you managed to hit it in the
Indeed,
first place.
that too. Or indeed, you might have to resort to possibly a backup.
Right.
Or indeed, just turning and running.
That's probably my game plan. But nonetheless, I want to see how these things are thrown. So can you give me a demonstration?
By all means.
OK, so talk me through your posture then. How are you throwing this thing?
Get into your hand and just feel the weight so that it's nicely balanced.
Ooh. Yes, I can see.
So you get the idea.
See, we got a professional here.
We have, haven't we?
Yep. Right, my go then, Roland?
Indeed, your turn for a right-hander. I'll just clean the dirt off. I always do that. It's a bit of a ritual. But...
Yeah, I want a nice clean kill.
Indeed.
OK, here we go. Oh!
Oh, right in the toes.
Might have got him on the toe. Might have trimmed his toenails. Come on, let's go and pick these javelins up then. Look, it did. Look, it hit the... Look, just hit the bottom there.
Is it actually in?
Look! It's stuck. I got it, look! I hit the shield. I got it. Well, I think certainly the English soldier that I hit with my javelin is going to have a sore toe. Right, come on, I want another go at this.
The people of Poulton, like villagers all over medieval Britain, would have had to have put up with some pretty rough conditions, and this place was in the middle of a war zone. Now, as far as we know, they knuckled down and got on with life. They were clearly a pretty resilient bunch.
Next, piecing together the lives of the Poulton peasants from the objects they left behind.
I feel really lucky to have had hold of that because someone at some point, hundreds of years ago, has used that.
And for all the 14th century's famines and wars, there was an even greater threat facing these villagers: the Black Death.
It would have been absolutely terrifying. People had no understanding of how this disease was being spread.
A lost ancient village and a series of incredible discoveries. Nearly 1,000 bodies, helping us understand more about the 14th century, possibly the most dangerous and troubled time in Britain's history.
Our time here at Poulton is coming to an end, but analysis of the skeletons that have been unearthed here is revealing a massive information about the health and lifestyle of the medieval community, and that's work that will continue for years to come. But skeletons aren't the only thing that have been found here. I'm on my way to where finds are being catalogued and stored and tell us a bit more about the story of Poulton.
Most of the graves include no personal possessions, but a wide range of artefacts have still been discovered. They include ornaments, coins, jewellery and pottery. Many of the finds have religious connections.
We're very lucky to have something like this. It's a little miniature jug.
I feel like you're offering it to me, Janet, but I'm nervous. Are you sure about this? Okay.
Absolutely.
But how would this have been used?
Well, this was probably used on the altar at the east end of the chapel, either for wine or oil. And it's quite common to offer comfort or communion to the local population, particularly in their hours of need and extreme, conditions.
But I feel really lucky to have had hold of that because someone at some point, whatever the story, hundreds of years ago, has used that.
The team has discovered hundreds of objects during the 2 decades they've been digging here. They date not only from the Middle Ages, but from Roman times and even from the Neolithic period.
You have a lot of unusual things. I mean, what is this?
Yeah, this is one of the metal finds that we have, and it's a piece of horse harness. And if you look very carefully, you just catch the light on the remaining gold decoration beside the white enamel pattern that would have been a butterfly or moth.
Oh, I see. That's brilliant.
We've heard about the hard times many peasants lived through, especially during the 14th century. There were bloody wars and catastrophic famines. But then, in 1348, Britain faced a terrifying new threat. At Poulton, some mysterious double and triple burials could be evidence of a disease so deadly that it wiped out entire families in a matter of hours. The Black Death.
But what was it actually like to live through this terrible epidemic? And how did it become one of the biggest killers in recorded history? The answers have not been easy to come by.
These are 3 images that up until recently were considered to be the iconic medieval depictions of the Black Death. Now, they were painted in the 14th century and they do depict some pretty nasty afflictions. However, they've since been debunked. We now think that this image represents leprosy and this one smallpox. It's unfortunate then that we have no surviving images from the time that tell us what the symptoms of the Black Death were.
Pathologist Dr. Susie Lishman is an expert in infectious diseases. She's been able to recreate some of the telltale signs in vivid and gruesome detail. Hello, Susie. I'm already feeling a bit queasy, but what have you got for me here?
Well, I have got a plague victim. Now, obviously, this is an actor, And this is somebody who's very much alive, so don't worry too much.
And what sort of symptoms are we looking for then?
I think the most obvious thing that we can see on our plague victim are these swellings in the neck. We've got large black swellings.
Right.
And the typical place for developing these lumps, which are known as buboes, is in the armpit. So the glands in the armpit get enlarged and they go black, and that would have been extremely painful.
Right.
Once the plague gets into the bloodstream and the bacteria pass around the circulation, they release a toxin and they can cause bleeding, both inside the body and on the outside. And what we're seeing here actually is gangrene, so the fingers, the extremities start to die.
Now, if we were to think about the average British medieval village, if people heard that the plague was coming, they'd picked up that it was in the local market town. Can you give me a sense of what life would have been like for those individuals, those communities, as they, one by one, contracted this disease?
Clearly, it would have been absolutely terrifying. People had no understanding of how this disease was being spread. They will have seen death rates in some villages were 90 to 100%. And of course, what that did, that often made people flee from the villages to try and escape it. And all that meant was that they took the plague with them. And so this is one of the ways in which the plague was spread so quickly throughout the countryside, was people running away from it.
So what do we know scientifically, then, about this particular form of plague, which was rife in the middle of the 14th century?
The plague is still around now in Madagascar, in the western United States, in China, and we don't see anything like the death toll or the mortality rates that were seen then. So something must have happened. If it's the same organism, which we now know it is, there must have been something else.
Some experts believe the unusually heavy rainfall that led to the crop failures we heard about earlier could have played a part in the appalling death toll.
People would have been malnourished, and that would have predisposed them to catching diseases because they wouldn't have had much resistance. So with people who were in poor health and who hadn't had enough food and were exposed for the first time to this new virulent organism, it's possible that that combination is what made the Black Death as fatal and extensive as it was.
With death, famine, war, and now plague, the adversities of the 14th century really did come to embody the biblical four horsemen of the apocalypse. And when we look critically at the evidence, it's clear that that period was a particularly difficult time within which to be alive.
We'll probably never find out how many villagers in Poulton lost their lives prematurely during that most dangerous of centuries. But with every dig season, archaeologists here are uncovering more of their secrets.
A successful season draws to a close. What's next for Poulton?
We've had a really good season, but it has thrown up far more questions than it's answered, and that's the nature of archaeology. All the human remains have now been sent to Liverpool John Moores University, so you've seen what they're doing there. They're analysing the bones, they're cleaning the bones, they're researching.
Ultimately, what will happen to those bones?
When we've got all of the scientific data we can out of them, we're going to return them to Poulton. They came from here, we'll bring them back for reburial here. This is where they belong. So they're helping us learn, but we will bring them back at the end because we never forget the humanity.
You know, Poulton is a really emotional place. When you look at those skeletons in the ground and you learn about the lives that they led, the struggles that they had, I mean, it's impossible not to stand there and sort of feel something really profound.
And what incredible struggles they were. I mean, when they weren't fighting wars or facing down disease, they were staving off hunger brought about by crop failure and financial hardship.
Maybe that's why I empathise particularly. I'm from a farming family in a rural area, and those people were the backbone of this country. Nobody would have had anything to eat if it wasn't for them working this land.
So maybe they deserve more recognition. I mean, they may have died 800 years ago, but they have left an indelible mark on the landscape we see around us. And they navigated their way through the century of crisis, one of the darkest and most dangerous periods of Britain's history.
New Digging Up Britain's Past is on Wednesday at 7. On Monday night at 9, an incredible story of a project that many thought could never come to fruition in brand new building the Channel Tunnel 25 years on. Next tonight, we peek behind the palace doors to reveal what our nobility are really like in brand new Secrets of the Royal Servants.
that was well-deserved. The medieval period was bloody and brutal, and according to many historians, life was at its absolute worst in the 14th century.
But just how bad did things get? Our next dig should give us some answers.
We're in Poulton, Cheshire, on the banks of the River Dee. It's the site of a burial ground stretching back 1,000 years and containing the perfectly preserved skeletons of hundreds of people. As archaeologists uncover the remains, they're finding that each has a story to tell about one of the most disastrous periods in our country's history.
In a century where violence was prevalent and sickness was rife, most peasants could expect only to live until their early 30s.
Incredibly, some did manage to survive and even thrive. And in this programme, I'm going on a nationwide tour to find out just how they did it.
I'm going to be staying at the dig to find out more about the secrets emerging from beneath.
Poulton lies on the border between England and Wales. It was first inhabited around 10,000 years ago, and there was a significant settlement during Roman times.